You know who I am. I'm Orville Wright, and I've come here to talk to you about, well, let me begin this way. I had this little incident recently, a close call. I was making my rounds of Army airfields, checking up on safety the way I do. I arrived at my destination and started my approach. It was a pleasant day, calm and pretty quiet. And then, all of a sudden... Ouch! I wasn't badly hurt, but where had that turbulence come from? Hardly any wind, and there weren't any aircraft or helicopters flying around or even turning up. The only activity anywhere around was way across the field. But how could that Chinook have caused the turbulence? I hadn't been anywhere near his downwash, and everybody knows helicopters don't pick up any wake turbulence. Or do they? I was telling about what happened to me at the club that night, and it was clear that other pilots thought the same way I did. There's no wake turbulence from a helicopter. I asked his opinion, and I got answers like these.
Wake turbulence? Not from a helicopter. Nah, it must have been a control system malfunction. Downwash, yeah. Wake turbulence? No such thing. Of course not.
No way. But then I was right back where I started. If it wasn't wake turbulence, what was it? Well, I figured I'd try a little experiment. I waited for a helicopter to take off. Avoiding the downwash area directly below, I cut across behind it and slightly below. I almost didn't recover. I was a fool for trying it so close to the ground. But I had to know. So I went out and tried again at altitude. I took up formation position on a Huey directly behind me. No problem. Then I tried holding the position, but dropping down a little, just a few feet. And wow, I got pushed down by turbulence that wasn't supposed to be there. I figured to give it one more try. This time, I took up formation position slightly below to see what would happen if I moved a little to the side. It had been a hard and tiring and scary experiment, and I decided it was snooze time. I started to doze off, thinking about what it had all meant. Suddenly, I remembered something. A movie I had once seen. Before I knew it, I dropped off to sleep. The movie came back to me in my dreams. It showed a model of a light aircraft in a smoke tunnel. You could actually see how the wing vortexes formed. Then it showed the real thing, wing vortexes from a jet transport. The smoke shows plain as day how the vortexes roll up on the outside and down in the center. It was already night by the time I woke up, but that dream had given me an idea. Find a smoke tower, have a helicopter fly past it, and see what happens. Simple.
Good idea. But we can't do it for you.
I've got no budget for a project like that.
I can't help, but let me know how it turns out, okay?
Sounds great, but who's going to build the smoke towers?
I did a lot of asking around and got a lot of turndowns. But if you stick with a good idea long enough, you almost always find a way. Take it from a wise old owl. Turned out the FAA had just what I needed at the research outfit in Atlantic City. I made all the arrangements and flew in for the test. The next day, everything was ready at last, and I thought, here it comes, the big moment when I'll get the proof. Nothing. It doesn't... Wait a minute. Look at that. Vortexes. Two of them plain as day. It does. It really does. A helicopter does generate vortex turbulence just like a fixed-wing aircraft.
Now you know, Orville. There is vortex turbulence from a helicopter.
Who said that? Who are you?
Me? Why, I'm your friendly off-screen narrator. You know, the voice you always hear in training films.
Where are you? I can't see you.
Of course not. You never see me. I'm just a voice.
But what are you doing in my movie?
I've come to tell you some things about rotor vortexes. And I'll start with what you can see right here. Notice that there are two vortexes, one from each side of the rotor disc. They both roll inward and down in the center.
So that's why I was pushed down once and up another time.
Right. Now, when a helicopter is at a hover under no wind conditions, the turbulence, of course, goes straight down. At a slow forward speed, it begins trailing behind slightly. Faster, and it's going as much behind as down. Up around cruise speed, the turbulence wake is like a tail behind the aircraft, drifting down slowly to lower altitude. This tail can be quite long, as much as a couple of miles behind the helicopter. How large and severe the wake is depends more or less on the size of the helicopter and how much load it's carrying. When a helicopter is flying near the ground, the vortexes descend as usual until ground effect takes over. Then they start traveling along the ground at about 5 knots. But consider how the wind can affect this. With a crosswind of 5 knots, one vortex travels away twice as fast. The other remains at the same spot and may linger for several minutes. But the most important point of all is this. The wake turbulence from a helicopter may be as intense as that from a heavy, high-performance, fixed-wing aircraft.
As bad as that? Who would have thought it?
So then the question is, what are the safety guidelines a helicopter pilot should follow to avoid wake turbulence accidents? The most dangerous situation is close formation flying. You're okay so long as you stay at or above the level of the aircraft ahead of you. Do not let yourself descend below this altitude. That's where the turbulence is. Around an airport, you're operating near the ground and in proximity with other aircraft. You need to keep the turbulence hazard in mind all the time. If you're following another aircraft on approach, fixed wing or helicopter, remember that his turbulence is behind and below. Avoid it by following the same approach path or a steeper one. Be alert to how the winds can carry turbulence across the field to where you are, or hold it stationary at one spot on the field.
From away across the field? So that Chinook really could have been the cause of my problem.
Sure could have. It was generating a lot of wake turbulence. The wind could have carried it right across the field.
I'm convinced there really is vortex turbulence from a helicopter. It's always there, and it can be violent. Who would deny it? I'm convinced. How about you?
Pachyderm 451, Pachyderm 451. This is Loader 60. The smoke is out.
This is Pachyderm 451. I identify green smoke, over.
Roger that. LZ is clear.
A CH-47 helicopter is approaching a forward supply point in order to pick up the swing load of a howitzer and its ammunition.
to be delivered to a combat force in the field. You have seen and heard one of the ways in which the ground force identifies its landing zone to the helicopter pilot. The smoke is placed out, and the pilot identifies the color. And stated that the green smoke was out, an enemy listening in could have also placed out green smoke, and the pilot would run the risk of landing in the wrong location and being ambushed. The smoke also indicates to the pilot the wind direction and intensity. A normal ground crew consists of 3 men, the signalman and 2 cargo hookup men. These men have donned protective equipment, steel helmet, protective goggles, and earplugs. They have already policed the operational area thoroughly to reduce the possibility of injury from flying debris or of an accident resulting from debris being drawn up into the helicopter rotor blades. The signalman locates himself upwind from the approaching helicopter, 30 to 150 feet from the hookup point. This distance is determined by terrain features, weather conditions, and the type of helicopter employed. He will use hand and arm signals to guide the helicopter pilot. The hookup men will be located with the cargo, and when hookup is completed, will move to a position 20 to 30 feet away from the hookup point. If an emergency should occur, the helicopter moves to its left, while ground crew personnel move off to the right of the helicopter in the opposite direction. As the helicopter begins to hover over the load, the signalman will move to a position about 45 degrees off the pilot's side of the helicopter, remaining in the pilot's sight at all times. The helicopter is now close enough for the signalman to begin directing it from the ground. Notice that the hand and arm signals given by the signalman are always clear and distinct. He does not wave his arms or move around unnecessarily. The signal he is making indicates to the pilot to move the helicopter forward. The palms are up, facing backwards, and repeatedly moving upward and backward from shoulder height. The helicopter moves forward, and the signalman directs the pilot to move left. The right arm extends horizontally sideways in direction of movement. The left arm is swung in front of the body in the same direction in a repeating movement. The signalman gives the move right signal. He extends his left arm and swings his right arm. Should he overshoot the hookup point, the pilot can be signaled to move rearward. The signalman's arms are at his sides, palms facing forward, and arms swept forward and upward repeatedly to shoulder height. The pilot is now directed to stop. The signalman's arms are repeatedly crossed above the head. The rapidity of the arm movement should be related to the urgency of the stop. The faster the movement, the quicker the stop. The signalman now requests the pilot to hover the aircraft. Arms are extended horizontally sideways, palms downward. To get the pilot to move the aircraft down, the signalman beckons downwards from the hover position. The rapidity of arm movement indicates the rate of descent. The faster the movement, the quicker the rate. To move the aircraft upwards, the palms are up and arms are moved upward, just the opposite of the downward signal. Now the helicopter is in position for the hookup. The hover hookup man handling the static electricity discharge probe grounds the cargo hook by contacting it with the probe, thus preventing the possibility of electric shock. The second hookup man completes the hookup, and the signalman indicates this by raising his hands alternately above his head in a rope climbing motion. When the hookup men are clear of the helicopter, the move upward signal is given until the slack in the cargo sling is taken up and the load is correctly suspended. The signalman then gives the pilot the takeoff signal by making a circular motion over his head with his right hand. ending with a throwing motion in the direction of takeoff. There are other signals which are used in conjunction with external helicopter loading. To move the hook up or down, if the helicopter, such as a CH-54, is equipped with a winch, the left arm with the right hand extended forward, palm faced in the direction of hook movement, making a vertical motion up or down. To release the sling load, the left arm is extended forward horizontally, fist clenched, with the right hand making a horizontal slicing movement below the left fist, palm downward. If you require the helicopter to land after it has released its sling load, arms are crossed and extended downwards in front of the body. The signal to cut engines is given with either arm and hand level with the shoulders, with the hand moving across the throat, palm downward, in a slicing motion. To indicate that the marshalling of several helicopters is finished, the right arm is raised with the elbow at shoulder height, palm facing forward. To reply to a query from the pilot, the affirmative signal is the hand raised, thumb up, and the negative signal is hand raised, thumb down. At night, we face a different situation. The helicopter which earlier picked up the sling load delivers it to another landing zone. The landing zone must be identified. We could use star clusters, flares, or lights. The ground force here utilizes lights with the T identification. The lights are placed out in the shape of a T with the stem of the letter indicating the wind direction. The pilot will come to a hover with the stem of the T on his right. The signalman, located upwind of the T and equipped with 2 hand wands, guides the helicopter into position for the release. Again, the necessity for clarity in signals is obvious. As the helicopter begins to hover over the cargo release site, the signalman moves to the pilot's side of the helicopter, remaining in the pilot's sight at all times. The signal being given is move forward. Notice that the signals are the same as the daytime signals. Move left. Move right. Stop. Move rearward. Hover. Move downward. With the cargo safely on the ground, the sling has enough slack to allow releasing the load. Release sling load is given. After the cargo is safely on the ground and the sling is released entirely from the cargo hook, move upwards is given. Finally, direction of takeoff is given. weather signals look like this at night. Hookup completed. Land. Move hook up. Move hook down. Cut engine. Marshalling finished. Affirmative. And negative. These are the signals which are used by the ground crew to operate with helicopters in the field. It is important to remember that the signals must be clear and executed properly so that the pilot is sure at all times of what has been communicated to him. Proper care must always be taken to ensure that the landing zone is not given away to the enemy, but cleared to the pilot flying the mission. These signals and techniques are vital and may constitute the difference between the successful and unsuccessful completion of a unit's combat mission when a supply by external helicopter airlift is required.
In the spring of 1965, the 1st United States Army combat troops were committed to the conflict raging in South Vietnam. The Viet Cong, fearful of the new M16 automatic weapon, called them the men with the little black rifles. Hanoi Hanna called them juvenile delinquents in green T-shirts. They were American paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and with fierce pride in their outfit, they called themselves the Sky Soldiers. Just back from Vietnam, a freelance correspondent documents the story of the unusual breed of fighting men known as the Sky Soldiers. To learn their story, he lived with the paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, followed them through the steaming jungles and rice paddies of South Vietnam, where they have made history.
The first time I saw them was the morning of May 5th, 1965. A seemingly endless stream of big-bellied silver C-130s began landing at Benoit Air Base, about 18 miles northeast of Saigon. Along with other correspondents, I'd gone to Vietnam to cover the arrival of the first U.S. Army combat troops. Watching them disembark, you couldn't help seeing that there was a special quality about these men. Young? Sure. But the way they moved and formed up without any confusion. Well, there was a feeling you get when you're watching real pros. They knew their business. After seeing them, I decided that I would stay in Vietnam and see these paratroopers in action. Brigadier General Ellis Williamson, commander of the 173rd, had arrived on the lead plane. Asked how long before his troops would be ready to begin patrols, he answered, "Tonight." As a matter of fact, it was a lot sooner than that. In only a few hours, there was a perimeter guard about the airbase. And patrols were moving out beyond the barbed wire. It was the first time in more than a year that any troops had made extended patrols outside the area. Besides setting up brigade headquarters at Benoit, a task force was landed at Vung Tau. It consisted of an infantry battalion with engineer and medical units, and its job was to secure and defend that airfield. A few days later, the rest of the brigade's personnel and equipment arrived by sea. They proceeded by road convoy to Benoit. Now, with all of its men and equipment, the 173rd was set to get rolling. The next 2 weeks were spent in sharpening combat techniques and revising tactics. These included eagle flight, fast strikes on targets of opportunity. And foot patrols in hostile areas. At the same time, the armored troops and the cavalry were making a show of force on the network of roads and conducting reconnaissance. Once secure, the roads came alive with native transport. For the first time in many months, the people of the province could journey to market and visit friends and family. The 173rd is a separate brigade, meaning that it's not part of a division. It's self-contained, the first airborne brigade to be so classified. At that time, the combat units consisted of 2 battalions of infantry, an artillery battalion with 3 firing batteries, a cavalry troop, and a company of armor. Combat support units included a medical company, a company of engineers, a maintenance company, signal and communications units, transport, supply, and administration. Independence of movement was provided by 2 platoons of troop-carrying helicopters and a gunship platoon. With the Benoit area made secure, large-scale attacks against the enemy were mounted. The largest of these took place at the end of May and employed nearly all of the combat units in the brigade. The infantry, artillery, and cavalry, as well as engineers and a platoon of volunteers from administration, supply, and maintenance units. It seemed as though everybody wanted to get into the act. The operation was strictly an infantry-type air-mobile assault. The landing zones had been pounded by the Air Force. Then, minutes before the task forces arrived, Army gunships of the brigade made a final sweep. The gunship platoon, nicknamed the Cowboys from their radio call sign, softened up the landing zones, or LZs. Then the first task force swung into action. It was made up of cavalry, engineers, support troops, and artillery. Their first mission was to secure the LZs for the other two task forces. When the other two task forces landed, the first elements were already in high gear. The operation got underway quickly and efficiently. You had to be impressed. Young as they were, these men moved like veterans, like pros with years of experience. Officers and enlisted men all worked as a team. You don't get this good just by accident. There must be a good reason. I haven't yet discovered just what it was. Almost from the moment this operation began, the Sky Soldiers met scattered enemy resistance. Day after day, for 4 days, the brigade moved ahead. Sometimes through jungle so dense you could hardly see the sky. Other times over fields where there was no cover at all. Everywhere the insects. And the heat pressing down like lead. Although the Viet Cong were hard to find and refused to hold their ground, many bunkers were uncovered. Viet Cong base camps were rendered useless, and the supplies captured to distribute to local villages. At the end of the fourth day, the brigade was picked up and returned to Benoit. The only way to get to know an outfit is to stay with it in camp as well as in the field. During the next few weeks, talking to the men gave me an opportunity to learn the brigade's background and explain much of the reason for its esprit de corps and its efficiency in combat. The 173rd was activated June 25, 1963, around a nucleus of the 2nd Airborne Battle Group of the 503rd Infantry, a direct descendant of the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment known as the Rock, which had jumped on Corregidor in World War II. Around these men, they formed a balanced airborne combat force. It was the first and only separate airborne brigade in the United States Army. For 2 years, these men, under the command and guidance of General Williamson and his staff, had been working and training together until they'd been forged into a unique, self-supporting strike force, capable of handling any emergency, any time, any place. These fighting men had trained in Okinawa, Thailand, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Their jungle skills had been honed razor sharp, and every last one was a qualified jumper. Airborne all the way. This was truly a crack outfit where re-enlistment often ran as high as 100%. And you can't get better than that. Although the brigade mounted many attacks in an area northeast of Saigon called War Zone D, which was supposed to be an impregnable Viet Cong fortress, contact with the enemy was always light and scattered. The VC preferred to lose large amounts of food and supplies and to give up their bases rather than stand and fight. It wasn't long before the Sky Soldiers found out why. Along with some captured supplies, documents were found which read, "Avoid fighting with the men who carry the little black rifles unless you have a much stronger force than they have." About this time, the brigade took on an international flavor. Attached to it were Australian troops, veterans of the Malaysian campaign, trained in counter-guerrilla warfare. These battle-seasoned soldiers were a welcome addition, fitting right in with the rest of the unit. These Aussies were soon to be joined by troops from neighboring New Zealand. In July, War Zone D was the scene of a massive attack against the Viet Cong. Vietnamese soldiers fought side by side with the troopers of the 173rd. It was a large-scale operation, with the full resources of the brigade employed against the Viet Cong. When the 173rd moves out on an operation like this, 60% of its support troops accompany the combat unit. At first, the fighting was light with little opposition. Then it got tougher. The Sky Soldiers are tough, aggressive fighters. And the deeper into the jungle they went, the fiercer the fighting got. Wherever the enemy was too deeply entrenched, the artillery blasted them loose. General Williamson's policy was spend bullets, not bodies. The operation lasted 4 days and was a tremendous success. There were more than 400 Viet Cong casualties and 50 prisoners captured. Over 100 tons of weapons and supplies had been taken. And thousands of documents captured, which proved to be a gold mine for intelligence. The brigade moved on from success to success. Quoc Tui, where a Viet Cong supply route was destroyed. Pleiku and Kontum in the Central Highlands to lift the siege and clear the roads for an Arvin relief column. And the so-called Iron Triangle. The Iron Triangle was an area where no friendly forces had set foot for more than a year. Air Force strikes, artillery fire, and Army gunships prepared the way. Then the infantry moved in, sweeping through the jungle. Despite the fact that the enemy was strongly dug in many areas, the Sky Soldiers rooted them out. And kept pressing right on. But in combat, even the victors must suffer casualties. Fortunately, the Sky Soldiers' casualties were light. The medics exposed themselves time and again to care for the wounded. Vietnam, dust-off is the affectionate code name for the medical evacuation helicopters, and they perform miracles in getting in and out of almost impossible spots. It took 6 days to work through the Iron Triangle, but when it was over, the Viet Cong had lost over 100 men, 6 camps, and thousands of pounds of supplies and food. The myth of the Iron Triangle had been broken and was to stay that way for over a year. As important as defeating the Viet Cong is the need to win the loyalty of the Vietnamese people. To this end, the men of the brigade applied themselves with the same spirit they showed in facing the enemy. A well-rounded program of civic action was initiated. An important part of it was routine medical treatment. To help the Vietnamese help themselves, heavy equipment was provided to build and restore roads. The men volunteered their free time to help in the construction of schools. And in educating the Vietnamese. Food and clothing were provided for villagers who had fled from Viet Cong oppression. For the first time in more than a year, many of the villagers were able to go freely to church, one that the 173rd had helped them to build. Sanitary wells were dug in villages that had never had clean, pure water. On their own time, and in some cases out of their own pockets, the Sky Soldiers undertook the sponsorship of orphanages and helped refurbish schools and playgrounds for the children. One of the brigade's most unique missions was Operation U-Life. For more than 2 years, the Viet Cong had controlled the rice harvest in this rich and fertile area. The mission was to drive out the VC, restore government control, and protect the harvest. In addition to the airlifted troops, long-range ground patrols helped to forge a long chain, which grew tighter as the troops swept across the area. By moving at night as well as by day, the 173rd broke another myth, that only the Viet Cong dared to move in the dark. By such actions, the Sky Soldiers began to win the confidence of the local population and to loosen the grip of terror that the VC held over the Vietnamese peasants. Kindness and decent treatment of the villagers, as well as the work of the civic action teams, resulted in bringing entire villages over to the side of the government. More than 300 of the VC were captured in this operation, and the local Viet Cong battalion defeated. For the first time in 2 years, the people of the region harvested their crop without fear, and the local government could once again function. As proof of the effectiveness of civic action and psychological warfare efforts, nearly 60 ralliers or defectors from the Viet Cong came in with their weapons to surrender. For the 173rd, the missions continued. There was Operation Marauder, directed against the VC battalion. They defeated the battalion and captured rosters which identified every man belonging to the local VC. In Operation Crimp, they uncovered a VC base camp in Hobo Woods, which included a tunnel complex that was 3 miles long and 6 levels deep. Operation followed operation. Dexter, Yorktown, Aurora 1, Aurora 2, Hardyhood, and Toledo with little or no break between operations. Operation Sioux City took them back to Zone D once again. Once more, the Viet Cong avoided full contact. But large stores of clothing, weapons, and other supplies were captured. The last operation I saw the 173rd carry out was Junction City. This was to be the largest multi-division operation to date. The target was War Zone C, near the Cambodian border, northwest of Saigon. The entire brigade was committed. But this time there was a difference. This was to be the first parachute deployment by American forces in the Vietnam conflict. The planes are bigger and faster today, but this is how it must have been when the old 503rd parachuted down on Corregidor in World War II. This is how it is with the men of the 173rd. No one hesitates. Each one is raring to go. Security was good, but there was some VC ground fire aimed at the paratroopers. A few of the jumpers found holes in their chutes to bear this out, but the only injuries were a few sprained ankles. When the jumpers were on the ground, the VC really opened up. The first job was to secure the drop zone. When it was secure, the C-130s began dropping the heavy stuff, equipment, and supplies. Operation Junction City was the biggest in Vietnam up to that time. Men of the 173rd did their job all the way. I've often wondered what makes an outfit like the 173rd Airborne the way it is. Part of it is due to the men who lead it, like General Williamson, who was responsible for organizing and shaping it. And General Smith, who took command in Vietnam in 1966. Followed by General Dean, who led the jump in Operation Junction City. Part of it is the training. The tougher the going gets, the better they seem to like it. Mostly it's pride. Pride in being part of an elite outfit of volunteers. One of the pros. They don't brag, but one of their infantry battalions was presented the Distinguished Unit Citation by General Westmoreland. By the time I left, they had 4 Medal of Honor winners among them, scores of Silver Stars, and they don't bother to count their Purple Hearts. These are the men of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, separate, airborne, all the way. By now, most of the men of the 173rd that I knew have rotated to new assignments. The ranks are filled with new names and faces. But the Sky Soldiers are still in Vietnam, fighting and working to help the Vietnamese people to build a free society of their own choice. And they'll probably stay until the job is done. Well done.